reading a little bit from the supplement to the budget that is part of the medium-term fiscal strategy that I believe has real context here. And it notes, excuse me, for the 22-23 budget, the overall tax structure has been left generally unchanged to provide policy consistency to the private sector and the tourism industry. The restructure of the tax regime in the last 2 years was important to rebuild the competitiveness of the tourism industry, make the tax system simpler, and help rebuild private sector confidence to assist with the post-COVID-19 economic recovery. This strategy has worked well in reviving the tourism industry excuse me, and supporting domestic demand, which has been critical for the current economic review. And we agree with those sentiments. Absolutely, because this revenue strategy we consulted widely with both RBF, FRCS, and the Ministry of Economy on these specific areas that we felt was going to help look after tourism and get it back on its feet again. And we also understood that it is better to have a higher VAT, a simplified and more equitable tax system, as opposed to 3 different tax rules. And while we might have appreciated having more than a week to adjust that changing tax policy, the change from paying 14 to 15% by a smaller number of large operators, these are the large hotels for instance, and the 9 to 15% by smaller size operators that exist, if you didn't know, in far higher numbers. And these had a huge impact on businesses, many of whom had to absorb the difference. But these are the kind of things that happen. And if we prepare for them, or if we get given enough time, it allows us to, work our way through it. In hindsight, we realized we could have probably been provided a little more time to adjust, given the time that the tax system itself needed to have its software adjusted to calculate that 15%. So we're learning these things as we're going along. And revenue policy principles make sense as well. And they're part of the commentary we've consistently followed up with the policymakers on. One of them is to widen the tax base by gradually removing the exemptions and the other distortions, totally agree. Improving the tax compliance and collection of tax arrears. To do this by focusing on the 20% that aren't doing the right thing, we often say, rather than focusing on the 80% who are paying the taxes, and looking for ways to penalize them and trip them up. We're saying to FRCS, and we constantly say this to the governor every time we talk to him, most people are doing the right thing. They are complying with the tax requirements. So make it easier for them to be more compliant rather than trying to trip them up and then penalize them. The other two are making the tax regime and the tax administration even more simpler. Who wouldn't want that? Because that's how you make tax compliance a little easier. And then reviewing the non-tax revenues on a cost recovery basis while ensuring that the vulnerable and disadvantaged are protected. That is what governments and financial systems have to do. So right now what's happening in the tourism industry is that you all know visitor numbers are currently really high, but there's still a little widespread nervousness throughout the industry that I work in that COVID could re-emerge as a different variant. That's never just going to go away. We suffered too badly and too painfully in the last 2 years for that to just, be sidelined. We're keeping in mind that the Russia-Ukraine war, it could further disrupt our trade routes, and it is still driving prices up. There's no one will dispute that, and any place that you go to, even if it's a retailer, will tell you that he's not getting what he's supposed to be getting in terms of his deliveries from wherever he's getting it from overseas. On top of that, we never ever in the tourism industry forget that we've got climate-based risks. And Samoa, the Cook Islands, and Hawaii have recently had the storm surges that impacted us. I think it was in 2021, which the likes of Castaway, many of the Coral Coast hotels, many of them, on top of the fact that they weren't actually making money, had to redo a lot of their coastal structures for their walls. And that costs a whole lot of money. But we were a little bit more prepared for the higher wave actions that came in the last full moon. Did you all notice the big full moon? Well, that usually means that we've got higher and higher tides. And we never ever forget when there's an impending Fijian election during the year. We always keep a wary eye on if that's going to mean anything. So these are some of the risks that we keep at the back of our mind to say these could impact tourism in any form or fashion. Some brief facts and figures. Our May arrivals stood at a little over 47,000. June arrivals went up to 62,130. And our year-to-date visitor arrivals are, as he mentioned, 205,529. And that's up to June 2022, which is around 50.4% of arrivals of the same period in 2019. So we're not doing too bad. Mind you, we did 849,389 visitors in 2019, so we've got some catching up to do. But we do know that the expectation is that July will surpass even these June levels. In 2019, July levels were around 93,000, and we may come quite close to this. These tourism inflows, they're expected to continue. Visitor arrivals are now projected to reach around 55% of our 2019 levels by the end of this year. But keep in mind that we've not yet returned to our full seat capacity, or our lift as we call it, that we were enjoying this time in July of 2019. So we're counting on the national airline to keep doing what it does best and to keep increasing its seat capacity. You'll be happy to know that bookings are still strong all the way into October. If you were trying to get a room for a group right up until October, you probably can't do that. We got interest from 1,000 delegates to come in around October. We had to say you need to move that booking to January, February or March because it's just not going to work. 42% of our direct employment are women. That increases to 60% if you include the indirect unemployment. And both directly and indirectly, the industry employs 118,000 people. So you're aware, not all tourism workers have returned to work. 2 years is a long time to go with either low wages or no wages. So many of our staff have changed industries. They started their own businesses, they've returned to farming. Some have come back, not all have. But we're seeing widening skill gaps with the workers being recruited by overseas agencies. It is a thing for us, and I'm sure it is a thing for many of the other industries as well. And we know this in turn provides increased remittances. That's fantastic for Fiji. It improves lives, and we're working hard to step up our training and get the next lot of cohorts trained up. We're working very closely with Kameli through FCEF to make sure that we can constantly pressure our higher education systems to make sure that we're rolling some of these changes out a lot faster. We want people to be trained in many of the skill areas that we're needed. Fiji has around 421 licensed hotels. That means that they've actually, been approved to have people, pay for accommodation there, and we sell around 13,000 rooms. A little over 60% of that room inventory of 40 rooms and above are actually locally owned. So a lot of that money is staying here in Fiji. This may actually be higher, but we're not privy to some of the ownership of the strata title properties, which, by the way, if you're looking at investment, that strata title property system for hotels is currently an investment model that is proved more successful than traditional bills, just as a by the way. Passing down tax reductions, I'm told everyone should know this, but it only works if you're making profits. Now, a couple of weeks ago, because we're working, FHTA is working with the Australian Trade Commission and the New Zealand Trade Commission to see if they'd like to come and take booths at our HOTEC, our trade show that we are putting up in October. And so I did a bit of a call around to the executive chefs to see what was some of their challenges in terms of deliveries from overseas. And they tell me that menus are affected because the delivery of seafood, fresh produce items, meat and dairy products, they're often only 50% of what is actually demanded from or ordered. And there are very few alternative options that offer better quality. We still rely very heavily on imported produce, and external factors govern a lot of these prices. And you know that many of these have not been very stable in the last 6 months. Oh, this thing doesn't work. Seafood, meat, dairy, fresh imported products. One GM just told me today it's currently a nightmare to source. She says due to a high demand, suppliers aren't able to fill these orders. Items are constantly in and out of stock. Simple things like hash browns, quality bacon required for every single breakfast 7 days a week in every single hotel that is currently full. Not always available. Seafood prices can be 70% higher than what is budgeted for and costed in the menus that are printed and provided. So one GM told me that they may have to revert to a blackboard menu just to show what is available.